You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 92. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm so glad to have you back. If you're new, welcome. You have picked a wonderful episode to start with. Today is an interview. It's a recording of an interview that I conducted with three very special guests, Yanique Russell, Siobhan Lennox, and Gina Alexandris. We sat down the other week so that we could talk about internationally trained lawyers in Canada and some of the challenges that those lawyers face, some resources that are available to them. And today is part 2 of that conversation. So if you haven't already listened to part 1 of this 2-part series, I encourage you to go back to last week's episode. You will absolutely love hearing from Yanique, Siobhan, and Gina. And as we dive into the second half of our conversation, we get more into some of the challenges that internationally trained lawyers experience while going through the process of qualifying and becoming licensed to practice as lawyers in Canada. We also talk about strategies that can be really helpful. And finally, we share resources. So if you listened to last week's podcast episode, then you're all set and ready. I just wanted to remind you that if this is a topic that is near and dear to you, I invite you to go to the show notes that accompany the recordings for this podcast episode and the previous one. You'll find a number of links to very helpful resources, including support networks for any of you who are going through the process. And if you are not yourself an internationally trained lawyer, but you know of lawyers who are going through this process, I highly encourage you to share this resource with them. It is so wonderful. The speakers are so amazing, so gracious. It is like having a fireside chat with your favorite mentor. And I am just so grateful to all of them for coming onto the podcast and sharing their wealth of wisdom, experience, and information with us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn us over to part 2 of our conversation. Thank you again for joining us here this week. I hope you enjoy this episode immensely. Take care, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now. Siobhan, we have talked before about Global Lawyers of Canada and the role that you've played within that organization. I understand they've been a support and you've been a support through that organization. We heard from Yanique, who is who's reaching out to you. I know of many other lawyers who were reaching out to you as well. So in terms of your journey, and you've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that you've had, what are some of the other challenges you might mention here that you experienced, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so really to reiterate both what Gina and Yanique have said, everybody's journey is different. There is a process, and that process is laid out for you on nca.legal. I can't say this enough. Please go to nca.legal. That is where you find the definitive answer of how you start this route. But once you're on that journey, then you have the ability to shape that journey to fit you and your requirements. And every single person who is either coming to Canada or returning to Canada or entering the common law jurisdiction in Canada comes with their own story, their own experiences, and that is going to shape your journey. And that's okay. And I think one of the first hurdles is accepting that you have your own journey to go on, and that within this process, you will find your own path, and to try not to compete with others and others' journeys. And that goes with competing with those who went to law school within Canada in this instance. It's your own unique way of traveling this path, and you will get there. And once you can internalize that, and this sounds so like hippie and wishy-washy, but once you can, but we're on a coaching podcast, so I can say it like this. But once you can find that way of recognizing that you're on your own path and that you will get there in your own time, it will make life a lot simpler for you, because you're not feeling that constant pressure in your head that you must compete with everybody else around you. So one of the other hurdles is understanding the path, but going beyond just that first step. Do the research, find out what the whole process is. Because when you're entering Canada and entering the Canadian legal system, as you said earlier, Paula, it's designed to be that you go to a Canadian university and you follow almost a timeline. You'll attend university and it starts on this date, you have your midterms at this date, and then you graduate on this date. And the way that law firms typically recruit, and I'm going to use typically because not every law firm does this, they will do their hiring process in line with the law school calendar. So they will do summer student places in the L2, L1, L2, so that's year 1, year 2, with the idea being that then you'll be hired back, or you'll be interviewing for articling positions during the beginning of L3, I think it is, third year, so that then when you graduate, you have a position to go to. And I say this as an ITL, if we're not in that timescale, then we can't take advantage of those deadlines. So then we're all out of sync with the process, which then just creates an additional hurdle for the candidates to go through the process. So look beyond the NCAs in terms of researching what it is that are the requirements, and look at the lawyer licensing process. Look at the individual bar associations of where you think you want to be licensed and where you actually want to physically live and work. And look at those bar associations, because they will have on their websites those timelines, and then almost work backwards through the process and sort of set yourself a calendar of all those important dates and set yourselves reminders, and give yourself the grace if you miss those dates. But at least if you know what those dates are, then you can work towards them, and then you're setting yourself up for success, because there's nothing worse than focusing all your attention on meeting those NCA requirements and then realizing that you've missed the deadline to apply for a summer student position or an articling position. So it's a matter of knowing what those dates are and then preparing for them. And then looking at your skill set. So one of the biggest things that people forget is you came with value. Every single person has value. We are right here. We're in Vancouver. We're on native land. We're on the unceded territory. I became a Canadian citizen yesterday, so this is very poignant to me.
Congratulations! Amazing.
Thank you. As I was giving my oath and becoming a Canadian officially, fully after 12 years of living here, and it really struck home that we are a country of immigrants, and we all come with some value to add to Canada. And this process can be very dehumanizing, because it is a process that we have to go through. So remembering to take away from our experiences and show how that value that we have is beneficial and adds value to our future employers, our future firms, and most importantly, our future clients who we're going to represent, because ultimately that's what we are. We're a service provider, providing a service to people in need. And so almost breaking down your resume or your CV, if you're coming from a jurisdiction that uses CV, breaking it down and looking at all those experiences, all those skills you have, and being able to talk about them. And Gina said this early on, makes sense to somebody who has no freaking idea what you're talking about. They don't know what the NCAs are. They've got no idea. It's this alien concept that's being bandied around by law societies at the moment. And to them, it's just difficult. You've just become a difficult candidate that they don't understand. And they don't mean, most of the time, hopefully, they don't mean to be rude about it. But if you're faced with two candidates in front of you, quite often we all default to just taking the one that makes sense and is easier. And if you're faced with another person who they just don't understand that experience, it's really easy to dismiss that because they just don't have the time to try and understand it. So if you can explain your story, then you're going to put yourself in front again, rather than being on the back foot all the time. And that comes from what Gina and Yanique and yourself, Paula, were saying about networking, because if you don't know what it is that people don't know about your story, it's very hard to then learn how to explain your story in a way that makes sense. And it can be really scary putting yourself out there. I'm not a natural public speaker. I've just done an awful lot of talking recently, especially during the pandemic, where I was hosting virtual mentoring office hours on behalf of Global Lawyers of Canada weekly. And it gave me the opportunity to practice telling my story. And I'm really long-winded, and Yanique knows this because sometimes she sits there and calls time and tells me to shut up because I've been talking for too long, which I appreciate greatly. So there's many hurdles and there's many challenges, but with everything in life, you can navigate them. It's just about being armed and prepared, and then going into it with your eyes open to what the process is, what the timings are. Be willing to put yourself out there and to meet people and to ask people for advice, to listen to that advice, but also use your gut instinct. If someone's telling you something and it doesn't feel right, go and check with a second source, because everybody has their own personal slant on the process, and they bring that to the table.
Beautiful. Siobhan, I'm going to jump ahead. This is one of the questions that I had prepared to ask you in terms of resources, right? Because this whole conversation that we've just been talking about, knowing the timelines, knowing how to set yourself up for success by doing that forecasting, what are some of the resources that you recommend an internationally trained lawyer look at to figure out? And you mentioned, I think it was the nca.legal. What other resources would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think nca.legal, because they are the organization who will ultimately decide whether you meet the credential requirements to be the equivalent of a JD student, JD candidate in Canada. Then you need to look at the individual law societies for the provinces or territories that you want to live and practice in. Then once you've done that, the individual bar association. So a bar association is not just provincial or territory, it's actually a much smaller region. So for example, we have the Vancouver Bar Association. There's the Toronto Bar Association, which just covers Toronto. Okay, Ontario is a really big place. So the Toronto Bar Association just covers Toronto. Look at the other bars outside of Toronto if you're thinking of living outside. And Yanique can tell you more about that than I can, because it's a whole other world on the other side of the country. And it really does feel like a whole other world at times. But then also look at some of the universities who are offering support to internationally trained lawyers. So those of us who've come from outside of Canada from our legal education, and look at what they're offering and see the alternatives out there. Both Gina and Yanique, you have mentioned some of those universities, University of Toronto, University of Alberta, University of British Columbia, the University of Toronto Metropolitan, whatever Ryerson is now called. I apologize, I don't know the new name. TMU, that's it. They do the LPP program, which is unique at the moment to Ontario. So it doesn't qualify across the country for those of you who are looking at. But look at all those. Look at the University of Victoria. Take a look at the schools and what they're offering. There are now many organizations out there who are offering training and coaching and support to help you through the NCA requirements and also through the bar requirements. But then there's also volunteer organizations, such as in Ontario, there's the NCA network, there's the Internationally Trained Lawyer Network, which are predominantly in Alberta, but they do a lot of things virtually. There's Global Lawyers of Canada, who are national, they go across the country. There's also CREIC, which is CREIC. They're in Alberta. They're specifically help new immigrants, and they have all sorts of support available in Alberta. So definitely look for them, and look at all the various different financial supports that you might need as well, because if you're an immigrant who's arriving, it's pretty expensive to move countries, and your savings can disappear really quickly. And especially if you're arriving with dependents, you already have expenses that are coming out, which may be very different to if you're arriving and you're 22, 23 and you don't have any dependents. So look at all the different alternative ways that you could find funding to help you, which there are available for immigrants to help you in that qualification process. GLC has a list of some of those available for you. I'm sure Gina has a huge resource bank that she refers people to as well that she can send you to. But also, just connect with people on LinkedIn. It can be a really simple thing to type in NCA or internationally trained lawyer, and you'll be surprised by how many people pop up. From partners now who've gone through the process, who maybe have been practicing for 40 plus years here in Canada, and they're willing to talk to new people who are arriving and starting this process and share their experience, all the way down to people who are maybe just, one tiny footstep in front of you. And as Gina was saying, you're not on your own. One of the biggest hurdles is that we arrive and we think that we're on our own. And maybe that was the case a few years ago, but with the advent of the internet, it's a really small world now, and you can connect with an awful lot of people. So do make those connections, start making those connections and reaching out to people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Siobhan. Love all those resources. And we will provide links to those in the notes that go along with the podcast episode. So thank you so much for sharing those. Gina, the next question is for you, which is looking at the number of lawyers that you've seen who have come to Canada. I'd love to hear some of the creative solutions that you've seen that they have engaged in order to obtain their qualifications, and also what you've seen at an institutional level, some creative ideas to help further the internationally trained lawyers who are coming to Canada.
Great question, Paula. And I think part of, you used a phrase that Siobhan just sort of ran with as well, but you said everybody is creating their own adventure. And I love that mindset. And I love that image that comes up, because it really is unique to individuals. There's a set structure, but within that structure, there are paths that everybody can take. And so in terms of creative solutions that people have done, and I think, Yanique, you've raised a few right now just from your own experience, but pacing things out, taking different times to do the different segments has been a really big piece for individuals in terms of being able to work all the different opportunities. Being able to, in terms of individuals, being able to find part-time articling, for example, if that's something that they're interested in doing, so that they could deal with life and that as well. Individuals have been creative in terms of supporting other ITLs. I'll mention two in particular here in Ontario, at least, Alicia Windsor, who herself is an internationally trained lawyer who gets together with internationally trained lawyers for lunches or dinners, and has set up, just like Siobhan has talked about, mentoring programs. Murray Gottheil, who's a retired lawyer, took some time to actually learn about what's happening with internationally trained lawyers and wrote 3 recent pieces on internationally trained lawyers, speaking to them about supporting their journey, but also speaking to his colleagues in the profession and reminding him of the strengths and the processes that everybody has gone through. So there are so many different ways that internationally trained lawyers can work through the 2 process. And I just want to highlight that it is stage 1 accreditation, stage 2 licensing, and they can have different quirks. I'll give you one big example. People come from different educational experiences, and then they have to do these NCA exams, which are based on law exams here in Canada. And for some people, it's the first time that they're looking at a fact-based exam. They're trying to find creative solutions in terms of how to deal with that. Flip to the licensing exams, at least in Ontario and some other provinces, and they're multiple choice. Some people have never done multiple choice exams, and all of a sudden having to study for a multi-hour multiple choice exam can overwhelm individuals. So being able to find your study groups to be able to get through some of those is really critical. On the institutional side, because I think Yanique and Siobhan would have more examples of sort of individuals. I've seen so many creative individuals, but on the institutional side, when the U of T started the bridging program, I was really grateful, because that sort of unleashed, if you will, some ideas and opportunities for institutions. So whether it was the LLMs, whether they were bridging programs, whether they were opportunities to do online or in-person prep courses for either the NCA exams or for the licensing exams. The law practice program that I was with for 9 years, which offered support for people in the licensing process. So instead of articling, they did this hands-on experiential piece, as well as the opportunity to have a work experience. So institutionally, and I will say in organizations, another creative way, one of the groups that Siobhan mentioned was the ITLN, so the Internationally Trained Lawyers Network. And she was right to indicate that there's a very structured timeline for most, not all. Please understand, a lot of it is not within this structured timeline, but many of the positions that come up that ITLs don't get a chance to participate in because of such structure and the timelines is the summer recruitment. And it, as Siobhan mentioned, it's the summer before you actually are eligible to start it that you have to participate in the recruitment. Well, ITLs were being kept out of this process because they wouldn't know about the timing. They wouldn't they wouldn't be in a structured stream to be able to participate. So the ITLN spoke to a number of firms, and it's been growing, where they have a separate OCI it's called on-campus interviews, although it's not on necessarily, it's not on campus, but it is the first stage of the recruitment process, where they actually have firms now signing up and registering to participate, so that internationally trained lawyers can actually engage and participate. So they get now a seat at that table, which I think is really, really important for them to know about and to be able to participate. Those are some of the creative solutions. And I think being able to talk amongst each other generates, I can tell you, when I think about what was in existence prior to 2012, 2010, very little before that. So much more now, and I think even more will grow afterwards. I did a webinar recently where we had an hour and a half where we chatted about all the different stages, and I think more and more people are talking about it and seeking out those resources.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gina. This next question is for you, Yanique, and I just wanted to first of all kind of give you a shout out. I mean, we connected, I think it was in 2020. It was 2019 or 2020, but I'm pretty sure it was 2020. And at the time I was doing these virtual classes for students who were transitioning to law firms. And I just remember, it was so great being able to work with you back then. And one of the things that you had on the horizon was this shift from going through your LLM that you were working on at Osgood and transitioning to articles. And that was at a time where everybody was struggling. Everybody, the students, whether they were in a regular Canadian institution or they were going through the NCA process, things had gone, so it was 2020, things had gone virtual. The interview process was just, everything was shifting and changing, and there was so much uncertainty. And in that environment, you were going through this already, choose your own adventure type of experience. And now you were looking to find work as an articling student in order to do the licensing part of your journey. And so I would love to hear from you in terms of some of the strategies that you used and you were always so proactive and so dedicated. And so I'd love to hear some of the strategies that you used to find your own path to secure licensing, and perhaps also maybe some ideas from what you saw your peers doing at that time so that they could also find articling positions.
Great. Thank you, Paula. And it's the same thought that came to mind when Gina started to talk about the LPP, because I remember being at that juncture and truly not knowing if I should go the traditional experiential training route of articling or I should pursue the LPP. That sounded, by the way, very attractive because it would teach you, if you had never been exposed to the practice of law, pretty much how to do it in Canada. But for me, one of the ways I was able to, narrow down what would work for me was one, again, talking with lawyers, speaking with mentors, speaking with people in your community, weighing the pros and the cons to assess your current situation and be able to figure out what would work, what would fit into your particular setting. For me, I was not able to do the LPP because it was very rigorous. 4 months of training and then the other 4 months you're with a firm. And for me, I was also preparing for the bar exams. So I thought that would have been too much. I did not get an articling position through the traditional interviews. It was actually someone who I helped on campus, and she was just in from Iran, totally new to Canada. I sat with her. I said, it's okay, let me walk you through. And through that connection, she said, my uncle is a lawyer. Are you currently looking for something? So I say that to say it's very important. I can't stress it enough to make connection. Yes, you're new to Canada, but you will not remain new forever. Okay, with time progressing, you need to ensure that you're forming connections that will serve you and that you can serve too. Okay. For me, it's just one of those things. People fear the unknown, and the NCA process is fairly unknown to a lot of employers. And as such, as Gina and Siobhan have said it, they will immediately go to what they're familiar with, JD graduates. Okay. So it's very critical for ITLs to, during their search for articling opportunities, not just go the traditional sending a resume in, trying to lock in some interviews, but they are literally forming relationships where people can either take them directly into a firm, connect them with other colleagues, make suggestions in terms of other companies that are hiring. And it's not always the traditional articling with a firm. No, there are other opportunities available. It's not always the Bay Street firm or, some boutique firm. No, there are other opportunities available. So it's being prepared, one. Two, actively pursuing, forming connections, actively networking. Three, understanding what you need to do through having those conversations. And four, following up. After you've done all this research, you've done all the work, stay connected with the relationships that you formed. It's not a touch and go, but this is now your group. This is now your tribe. I met you in 2020, Paula. I did your course. And for me, the benefit of it, being able to know what would be expected of me as an articling student, even before being in the firm, I had no option but to continuously seek resources through your coaching services. Okay. With Siobhan, for me, she was a corporate lawyer at the time. I thought, okay, I'm going to be practicing in business law. So I continuously bugged her. I said, let me see what a day in your work life looks like. Okay. And these are the things that we need to do as ITLs. We can't curl up in a shell. It's a new place, but you won't always be new here. Step out, forge your path, form the connections that you need to form, and just know that one day, like, all this will be behind you. It'll be something to laugh about, but it's going to be what makes you stronger.
Just so great, Yanique. And I love what you said. I mean, everything that you said, but particularly when you were talking about relationships and the relationships that will serve you and that you also serve, because I very much find in our relationship, it's a mutual relationship. I feel so honored and I love being friends with you and being in your network. There's so much service there. And going back to something that Siobhan was saying earlier about arriving in Canada, already having so much to offer, so much value, so many experiences to share. And even that situation you described, Yanique, where you were speaking with the woman who'd come in from Iran and you being several steps ahead of her, maybe even just one step ahead of her, you were able to sit down with her and make the path less complicated for her. You were her Sophie effectively. And so in that networking environment, and I talk about this a lot when I talk to lawyers about networking, because I think sometimes we look at networking as this thing we don't want to do because we've got negative associations with it. And yet it boils down to relationships and that give and take of relationships. So I think looking at it from that perspective and opening our minds up to it, whether or not it's something that comes naturally, it's so important and it can be done. And like you said, follow up, right? Continue on. We know what we need to do. Now let's go and do it. And Yanique, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, which is, do you have any particular resources that you'd recommend to internationally trained lawyers who are just getting started?
So all the resources that have been mentioned, if you're not a part of the CBA and the OBA, please join. Well, that's if you're in Ontario. But as Siobhan said, there are law associations even within the province, okay? And they have student sections. I've been a member of the TLA, for example, since 2019 when I was just a student. Besides that, you need to ensure that you are looking on the websites of these major universities that offer the LLM programs, because they have charted out pretty much the process of becoming licensed in Canada so clearly for you. I know it's on Osgood's website. I think it's also on UBC's website. That will help you to understand, okay, this is what I do next, and so on. The Law Society's website, they have resources that can assist ITLs. Besides those, ensure that you are connecting with the GLC. Ensure that you are finding some mentorship group that will assist you. Ensure that you are getting coaching if you need it. Paula, do you still offer those 2 courses for ITLs?
I was offering a transition course, and I don't know if I'll be offering it this year, but I have offered it or something similar to it in the last couple of years, sort of in the spring when students start law firms. But if anybody would like access to that information, I can always share that with them. I can find a way to do that.
Yeah, that for me, because not all ITLs come in with prior legal practice under their belts. Some are fresh out of law school. They don't know what the practice of law actually looks like. They've all been just theory. So in order to, and I'm not going to promote working for free. I know that that's another elephant in the room. Persons think that ITLs are so much in dire need of Canadian legal experience, and they take advantage of it. But if you are able to get some sort of experience in either through being a law clerk or a legal assistant while you're pursuing your NCA courses, that will assist you when you are preparing for your bar exams, because at least as far as Ontario goes, you'll be able to understand, okay, these are the timelines and these are why they're important. But I can't stress enough connecting with people, forming the relationships, resources such as what's available on the websites of the law societies, the universities, and these law associations that are within the provinces.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Siobhan, so we have time for a couple more questions. One for you, Siobhan, and one last question for Gina. And thank you all again. It's been so great having you here, and I'm so grateful for everything that you're sharing with us. Siobhan, what do you find, and you've witnessed a lot of journeys, especially through your role within GLC. And what would you say distinguishes an ITL who succeeds in the process and someone who does not succeed?
Gosh, that is such a loaded question. And when I read this, when I was pre-sent these questions, I was like, gosh, that's the hardest question of all of them today, because success is so...
It's subjective. It is.
It's so subjective. But I think for the students and the candidates who have graciously given their time and their story to me, when they've come to me through mentoring or just reaching out through LinkedIn or coming to any events that we've held, or even just calling me on the phone, one of the things that I think makes them successful is their willingness to listen to others, their willingness to learn about the process, and then take that process as their stepping point and then make it their own. And to give themselves, and I said this earlier, to give themselves the grace to deviate from that path, because a lot of people come in, I think, with an expectation of what it should be like and what they want to achieve. And the reality is that the practice of law is evolving, as is many other professions. And having that flexibility to change, because you as a person are going to change as well, is really, really helpful. And then, like Yanique said, it's the following up, it's the continuing to do it. It's the realizing that those relationships that you're making are not one-sided, that you're not constantly just taking. It's also that you're providing something as well. It's a weird and quirky thing to say, but networking is like building a friendship. And that friendship doesn't work if it's not a two-way street. And that networking can be through finding a mentor. It can be through finding a coach. It can just be finding a group of people who are going through a similar process to you at a similar time. But it's what can you also offer those people as well. And so it's realizing that and realizing that the process will take time, and it will take your time, not anybody else's time. And I see so many people coming through, and as you said earlier, both Paula and Gina, people come through and they want to do it so quickly. They're like, I must take all of my NCA requirements now because I must be sitting the bar exam on this date because I must be articling by this date. But those are self-imposed dates, and there's lots of different ways of getting there. And I think for those students who are Canadians who have chosen to study abroad and then they're coming back, many of those universities offer support of how to do things for you, and they almost set you up to follow that path. But remember, you don't have to follow that path. You can deviate within it as well, but use your networks that you had before you arrived as well. People often forget about those networks. So we may not have the university alumni network that a student might have if they went to U of T or UBC, but we have our own networks. And you find that as an ITL, as an immigrant, as somebody who's traveled around the world, that you have a ridiculous network out there who may be able to connect you with different people. And I think one of the successes that I often see is the people who appreciate that that network may not be in law. They may be first generation lawyers like Yanique. They may be first generation immigrants like Gina and myself, but they utilize that network in different ways and they find their own unique way of getting there.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. And finally, our last question is for you, Gina. What advice would you give to somebody who's about to embark on the path of qualifying and working in Canada as a lawyer?
Oh, wow. Thank you for this really fabulous discussion, Paula.
And gosh, thank you. And thank you, Yanique. And thank you, Siobhan. It truly is amazing.
It has been. And I think in terms, there are a couple of things, if I can, to say. One, picking up on Yanique's comments about groups, and I think Siobhan said it as well, another group, and I don't want to lose it, sometimes we come with affiliate groups. So for example, my Greek heritage, I didn't realize this when I was a student, but there's a Hellenic Canadian Lawyers Association. There's the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers. There's the Federation of Asian Canadian Lawyers. Very recently, an internationally trained lawyer started and I'm going to get it wrong, but the Irish Canadian Lawyers Association, it's a different acronym. And she's so enthusiastic because she wants to be able to support others coming in, but also network and meet other lawyers who have that affinity group or that experience. There's the Women's Law Association. If you're interested in corporate counsel, there's a Corporate Counsel Law Association. So not just the formal, broader Ontario Bar Association and Canadian Bar Association, but the affinity groups. If you happen to be an LGBTQ, there are groups that have that affinity. And so there's different affinity groups that you may want to meet to be a part of. And Siobhan, I think it was you that said, typically there are student rates for most of them. So it's a great way of meeting others in the bar to expand your network. But in terms of someone who's about to embark on the path, if you're Canadian who's thinking about going abroad for one part, I would say do your due diligence, know all these resources ahead of time so you understand what's before you. You understand what to expect when you return. If you're an ITL now, and whether you are about to come to Canada or return to Canada, the one thing that I would say is be realistic. Be realistic about the timing that we discussed. Be realistic about the expectations in the profession and of yourself. Be realistic about the skills that you do have, because you do have skills, but be realistic of some of the gaps that you might have. So if you've never written a resume, I have had lawyers who've said to me they've worked for 10, 15 years and they've never had to apply for a job. Well, this expectation of writing a resume is new for you. Get some support and some help with that. If you've never gone on a formal job interview, again, get some support for that. If your writing skills are not yet what you really want them to be, get some support to work on that. And of course, all that takes time and takes energy. So together with being realistic and being open to those changes that are going to happen, also be compassionate with yourself. Understand that change is really hard. You've made the choice and the wonderfully brave decision to make this leap to a new jurisdiction and to look at this new process. That's hugely brave and hugely strong. That shows tremendous strength. So be compassionate with yourself when things get bumpy or things get a little difficult or things get tiring, because they are all of those. but you've got what it takes to move forward with it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gina. And before we wrap up, a couple questions. One is, where do we find you? And two, is there anything that we didn't cover today that you would like to add? Knowing that there's probably a lot of things that we did not cover, but if there's anything that stands out, love to hear it.
GinaAlexander.com, and we'll have that. If anybody needs to find me, I'm happy. And I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm happy to have that. Sorry, Yanique.
Sorry, Gina. Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn as Yanique Russell as well. Or you could email me at yanique@yrussellLPC.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And Siobhan?
Yeah, you can get me on LinkedIn, Siobhan Lennox, but also know that, moving jurisdictions once isn't necessarily the end. You could always move again. So many of the skills that you make during this particular journey may well be applicable in the future as well, and may apply to other parts of your life as well. So don't forget about all those transferable skills that we all have that we don't think about. So if you don't find that position as a legal assistant, and honestly, I was a legal assistant, and I don't want to go against what Yanique said, but I don't necessarily think it's the right route for everybody to be a legal assistant, because as we talked about earlier and Gina mentioned, people have a perception in their mind of the route that people go through, and it's very hard for them to sometimes see you go from one level to a different level within a law firm. And you almost end up having to do a complete shift, a lateral shift across and go again, which may not be the right step for you. So look at alternative legal careers whilst you're going through this process. Build up that skill set in different ways. And we haven't talked about this today, but there's this dreaded phrase that gets bandied around for the international legal community, but also for anybody really entering Canada. And it's called Canadian experience. And it's a term that I can see everyone's head is shaking because we all hate this term. And it's not just applicable to lawyers. It goes across every single job you will go into. But you have experience. So look at all of that experience you have, and you can just Google transferable skills. We have a video on the Global Lawyers of Canada YouTube channel where we actually discuss transferable skills, and Paula helped me with that session. So definitely go look at that, look at other resources that talk about it, because you have experience there. It's just how you demonstrate that experience. So don't be afraid if you keep hearing that phrase. It's just another thing that's being thrown into your path. You will navigate past it. And these are just hurdles. They're just speed bumps in your journey. And if you can keep that positivity throughout the process, you will navigate it. It just might not be in the timescale you maybe initially set, but that's okay. We readjust. That's why we have calendars. We just turn the page and use the next page. So it's all good.
I love it. I love it. Thank you again, everyone, for joining Gina, Yanique, Siobhan, everyone who has tuned in to listen to today's podcast. Thank you for being here. And it has just been such a pleasure. And I know that this is a resource that will resonate with so many lawyers and answer so many questions and provide resources that will be that helping hand, right? For somebody who's on this process, and create that sense of connection, create that sense of not being on this journey all by themselves, that they know that there's resources that they can turn to, and some really practical, useful strategies, including one of the biggest themes that has come out of today's conversation, which is networking, right? It's building those relationships and establishing that social support for yourself. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. So much appreciated, and look forward to reconnecting again soon, I hope.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.